Because our club recruited the best volleyball players in the city, we will have the best team in the city.
No, you won't.
Okay, that's a part to whole flaw right there. Just because you have the best players doesn't necessarily mean that your team overall will be the best. We have to grant you that you do have the best players, but they may not play well together because the sum of the parts may be actually less than the sum of some other parts that are
Yeah,
worse.
and Ben immediately went right to the LSAT teacher thing, right? He has a name for this flaw because that's a common flaw. He
Mm-hmm.
said, "Oh, that's the whole part or the part to whole flaw rather.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
parts don't have to have the same attribute as the whole."
Yep.
But it's just common sense. Everybody has seen pick your favorite sport. You've seen your favorite team sport. You've seen a dream team come together that turns out to be a nightmare because even though it's all of the super best players, they ball hog it or they're poorly coached or who knows what. They can all be the best players, but they do not have to be at all the best team. All right.
Yep. This argument continues. Moreover, since the best team in the city will be the team most likely to win the city championship, our club will almost certainly be city champions this year. Okay, so I'll grant this author, and I think I might have to because it looks like it's in a premise, but this person is saying that the best team in the city will be the team most likely to win the city championship. That doesn't seem too crazy to me. You're more likely to win than any of the other teams. That said, saying that our club, or concluding from that our club will almost certainly be city champions this year, is confusing I'm going to go LSAT terminology here, but it's confusing a situation that's relative. Like you're more like this team is
Mm-hmm.
more likely to do better than another team doesn't mean that they're likely to win, right?
Yep.
Like you still may be up against a ton of teams, and maybe you have a 10% chance of winning and all the other teams have only a 5% chance of winning. So you're the team that's most likely to win because you have a higher chance than anyone else, but your chances of winning are still very small because you're up against a large field of clubs.
Yep. And sure, you could have the best chance of winning, but if
Yep.
there's 100 teams in the competition, maybe the best chance, maybe you're the best team by far, and you have like a 10% chance of winning the tournament. There could be no other team that has a 5% chance of winning the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
You have a
Sure.
10% chance of winning the tournament because you're the best team by far, but you're still only going to win 10% of the time. And in their conclusion here, they went to almost certainly be city champions, which that means most of the time, right? Doesn't that mean more than
It
half of the
does.
time?
It does. Yeah.
So there's a second flaw here. And to the extent that this question is hard at all, it's hard because there was the first pretty obvious flaw.
Yes.
Just because you have the best players does not mean that you have to be the best team. But even if we grant you that you are the best team and that you do have the best chance to win the city championship, that does not mean that you're almost certainly going to be city champions because we could have 1,000 teams in the field, but that doesn't mean you're more than a 50-50 to win the tournament.
Hey, so
Yeah.
just so people are familiar with these terms, the LSAT jargon I would use to describe this flaw is the person is going from something that's relative to something
Mm-hmm.
that's absolute. So they're saying, hey, this team is more likely to win than any other team, but that doesn't mean that they're likely to win. Just say by analogy, if you're the tallest person in the room, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're tall, right? It's the same kind of problem. The test is testing logic, and logic usually by definition makes sense.
Yeah, that's the whole
That's
thing about
why
it. Yeah,
it's
I love that.
logical.
Yeah.
The one case that people may struggle, even with a clear understanding of the logic, is in a flaw question where they describe or try to describe that flaw, right? because they use those terms, relative and absolute, and for some people it might be like, what? Like, what is relative? What's absolute? What do you mean by that? And the LSAT does use those terms sometimes.
And that's where the flaw lies here, is from the relative premise, most likely to win the championship. It's
Yep.
and actually they switched terms here to almost certainly be city champions, which I'm not sure
Yeah.
exactly what that means, but it does mean like more than half the time.
Yeah.
Likely implies more than half the time, so that's an absolute term.
Exactly. When I saw the phrase almost certainly, I translated that in my head to likely, because I'm just going to treat it as greater than 50%, which is what likely means.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
what I
like
saw too.
most
I was
likely.
like, yeah, more
Yeah.
than half the time.
Yep.
That has two flaws. And now the question's asking us, the reasoning in the argument is flawed because what? Are you thinking anything here before you go to the answer choices on a flaw question? What are we doing?
Yeah, I'm looking for something that's going to describe exactly what happened in the argument in terms of the flaw. There are two flaws, at least two flaws in this argument. So I would expect the correct answer to describe either one of those. I would not expect the answer. I would not expect the two answers to describe these flaws, one describing one and one describing the other, and then
No
we'd have to
way.
choose between the two because
Absolutely
they
not.
would both be correct, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Notice it doesn't even say anything about like most flawed because whatever, right? So I'm looking for something that they did wrong,
yeah, yeah,
right? So
yeah.
it can be a two-step analysis because it's like a must be true first. I know they did this thing. If I can't prove that they did the thing that the answer is describing, then this is not the answer. So they have to have done it. And furthermore, it's wrong that they did it. So you should probably already be yelling about it in your head.
Cool. Now, this might be looking into the test a little too much, but I'm kind of anticipating, because the first flaw was so obvious and the second flaw was clearly a flaw but not so obvious for people. I'm wondering if the test is likely to give us an answer choice that incorrectly incorrectly describes the first flaw in an
Well,
attempt to pull people off, right? And get people to choose that because that's only what they're looking for.
yep.
And they try to fit that answer choice, that
Yep.
circle answer choice,
Well,
into a square
I bet you can go
hole.
one step further. Specifically, what do you think they're going to do to try to trap you here? That first flaw that you identified so easily was what again?
It's going from part to whole. So maybe they'll give us one that goes from whole to part or something like that.
Almost guaranteed.
Yeah. And it will be wrong, but it will be the only thing that people are looking for. And so then they're just going to say, this is the best answer. There's not really a best answer in flaw questions.
Yeah, good point. Yep. No, that's there's just not the best answer on it. You could go ahead and presume that there is no such thing as the best answer on any LSAT question. There's one correct answer and four wrong answers on every LSAT question.
Yeah, I think the presumption is important because if you think most questions have answer choices in which it's a matter of degree, like, oh, well, if we got rid of the correct answer, would this one work? Yeah, like this one would be great. No, you're missing something that usually makes that answer impossible for it to ever be correct. It would be really bizarre for the LSAT to like force that as the best answer. And you're missing that because you're just thinking, oh, it's just like not as good. No. There's like a word that's like gone. And if you realize that word's gone or been added to that answer choice, you see it and you're like, oh, that's never going to work. So anyways, that's what we're worried about, I think, right? Is people not realizing what's really wrong with that answer.
Anyway,
Cool.
We're looking for a flaw, something that this argument did wrong. Go ahead.
A, presumes without presenting relevant evidence that an entity can be distinguished as the best only on the basis of competition. This is like reversing what happened here. Like we concluded what the competition outcome would be from the fact that they were the best team. This is like saying, oh, we could we can conclude, or we can, decide that they're the best only on the basis of a competition. In other words, the best becomes like the conclusion or something like that. So in my mind, this is flipped. I'm not even going to think much about it.
Yeah. And I mean, they just didn't, they just did not they didn't say competition is the only thing that can distinguish us as the best. Matter of fact, they did the exact opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
They said we have the best individual players, therefore we're the best. That has nothing to do with, hey, look at our record or look at our game we just played against the city champions or whatever. Okay.
B, predicts the success of an entity on the basis of features that are not relevant to the quality of that entity. Okay. Is this happening? No, because it does predict the success of an entity, the club, on the basis of features. They're the best team, but those features are relevant to the quality of that entity.
Players.
Yeah, the players. So we have they're looking at the fact that they're the best players to decide that they're the best team. That's flawed. You can't do that. But to say that the fact that they're the best players is irrelevant is
right.
also flawed. Like it's
right.
going too far in the other extreme.
Right.
So
so the burden of proof is on us here. Did they do it wrong?
Yeah.
That first step, did they do this? It's like a must be true question. So you have to imagine standing up in court and saying, Your Honor, their argument is built on features that are not relevant to the quality of the team. And you're going to really try to make that case that the quality of the players is not relevant to the quality of the team. So they did not do what B is describing.
Yeah. C, does the argument predict the outcome of a competition? Yes. Merely on the basis of a comparison between the parties in that competition.
I say yes, give them credit for it.
Okay. The
Even if they
word in
did.
there is merely on the basis of comparison. Yeah, it does seem like that. They said, hey, they're the best team.
Well, even are the best players is like, yeah, that's a comparison of our team to your team, right? Our players are the best players in the city.
Yeah.
That means yours aren't. Our team is the team most likely to win the city championship. That's a comparison between the parties in the competition. So let's say, yes, they did do what C is describing.
Yeah. Is that a problem? Can you predict the outcome of a competition merely on the basis of a comparison between the parties in that competition? It doesn't seem too crazy of a way to predict the outcome.
It seems
What
like
else are
the
you gonna
very
look at?
best way to predict the outcome. I mean, let's take it down to just two teams in the fight or like an actual boxing match.
Yeah.
You've got a boxing match between Shaquille O'Neal and Nathan Fox. You look at the
Yikes.
7-foot, 400-pound monster, and then you look at me and you go, based on a comparison between the two parties, I'm going to predict that Shaq is going to win this boxing match.
And I was just thinking about it. I was like, okay, if you're not predicting the outcome of a competition merely on a basis of the comparison between the parties, okay, so maybe you look to outside information, right? Like some rules or something. But even then, I think you're going to have to tie them back to the parties in some way, right? Like how would those rules affect the parties? So I don't see this as being a problem, or at least a huge one.
It's tricky because they did it, but you're just going to have a hard time making the case that it's wrong that they did that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it didn't C doesn't, they didn't like predict it absolutely on the basis of merely a comparison, right? They just said, well, yeah, we're going to win. We're the most likely to win. So we're going to almost certainly be the city champions. The problem there is the relative to absolute. The problem is not you really need to consider other things besides looking at the teams that are in the tournament.
You need to consider the weather. Well, yeah, but even then you're going to bring it back to the
We're the
parties in
best
some
team. The
way.
weather affects everybody. Yeah, right. You can't do that weather analysis without also getting back to like, well, you have experience. We're in the weather and you don't have experience in the weather. So that you're still going to be making a comparison between the parties. All right. Anyway, C is not a problem.
Cool. D, presumes without providing warrant. That just means necessarily assumes that if an entity is the best among its competitors, then each individual part of that entity must also be the best. No, this is going backwards. It said each part is the best, therefore we are the best. Each of our players is the best, therefore we're the best team. Not, hey, we're the best team, so each of our players must be the best. So this didn't happen.
D misdescribes the argument. You stand up in court and start yelling about they did D. Their defense is, no, we did not.
Oh, this done. Answer, this. Sorry, I started reading ahead to the next answer, and there's some more relative absolute stuff we get to talk about here. So it says E.
Oh, good.
Concludes. So this argument concludes that because an event is the most likely of a set of possible events, yes, they're the team most likely to win, that event is more likely to occur than not. The phrasing, so this is exactly what we described, is talking about going from something that is most likely to happen to something that is likely to happen. Even though you're the most likely event to occur, you could still be pretty unlikely.
Yep.
But this is interesting because the last phrase of this answer choice says that event is more likely to occur than not. That sounds like a relative phrase, right? Because it says more likely. But if you say you're more likely to occur than not, all you're saying is that you're likely to occur, which is an absolute. So this is describing the relative to absolute flaw in the second half of that argument.
It's exactly what we predicted. It's exactly what we were looking for. We would fairly easily pick E.